Case 1. Paula Cooper. In the summer of 1985, a crime that would send shockwaves through the heart of America and ignite a fierce global debate was set in motion by a 15-year-old girl named Paula Cooper. What started as an impulsive plan between 4 teenage girls quickly spiraled into an act of violence that would change their lives forever. But the true horror of Paula's story lies not just in the crime itself, but in the heartbreaking aftermath that would capture the world's attention, turning Paula into a symbol of both tragedy and redemption. Growing up in a home marked by neglect, abuse, and violence, Paula Cooper had never known stability. Her childhood was a chaotic blur of broken homes and shattered trust. By the time she hit her teenage years, she had already seen enough pain to last a lifetime. But even in her darkest moment, no one could predict the monster her circumstances would create. No one could have predicted that Paula, just 15 years old, would become the center of a crime that would haunt the justice system for decades. On May 14, 1985, Paula and 3 other girls skipped school and set out on a mission that would forever stain their young lives. They decided to rob someone, not just any stranger, but Ruth Pelkey, a kind-hearted 78-year-old woman from their neighborhood who had once welcomed them into her home. Ruth had been a retired Bible teacher, known for her generosity and willingness to offer guidance to anyone who needed it. But on that fateful afternoon, she was not seen as a woman offering comfort. She was a target. The girls had one goal: money. They wanted to buy clothes, food, and things they felt they desperately needed. But the situation quickly escalated, and what was meant to be a simple robbery turned into something much darker. Ruth Pelkey was murdered in her own home. The crime was shocking, not only because of its brutality, but because it involved 4 teenage girls. The senselessness of it rocked the entire community of Gary, Indiana, and left people struggling to make sense of what had happened. Paula, just months away from her 16th birthday, was quickly identified as the ringleader. While the other girls were younger, it was Paula who attracted the most attention. The courts would soon decide her fate, and when they did, it would spark a storm of outrage and division across the nation. Prosecutors, outraged by the heinous crime, pushed for the harshest penalty available under Indiana law: the death sentence. In 1986, after a brief but emotionally charged trial, Paula Cooper became the youngest person on death row in the United States. Her case was headline news. Some saw the death sentence as justice. Others were horrified. How could a 16-year-old, someone so young, be sentenced to death? People who knew her story, her upbringing, her abuse, wondered whether this was truly justice or a tragic overstep by the legal system. Calls for clemency poured in from around the world. Human rights groups rallied behind her. The Pope himself, Pope John Paul II, appealed for her life to be spared. Millions signed petitions to save her, many of them from outside the U.S., arguing that condemning a child to death was too extreme. While Paula remained on death row, locked away in solitary confinement, her story took another unexpected turn. In prison, she began to change. She spent her days reading, studying law, and working toward her GED. Over time, prison staff noticed her transformation. She was no longer the angry, resentful teenager who had once committed an unforgivable act. Instead, she was becoming a woman who was determined to turn her life around. But would it be enough? In 1989, after 3 years of legal challenges, the Indiana Supreme Court overturned Paula's death sentence. They ruled that, given her age, sentencing her to death violated evolving standards of justice. Her punishment was reduced to 60 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. Paula was moved off death row and placed in a general population, where she continued her education and worked on bettering herself. But the most remarkable part of Paula's story was yet to come. Bill Pelkey, the grandson of Ruth Pelkey, had once supported Paula's execution. But as the years passed, Bill's feelings began to shift. He came to believe that vengeance was not the answer. In a shocking act of forgiveness, Bill visited Paula in prison and forgave her. What followed was a journey of reconciliation. Bill became one of Paula's most vocal supporters, advocating for restorative justice and speaking out about the power of forgiveness. After nearly 28 years behind bars, Paula was granted parole in 2013. At 43, she was free. The world watched, some with hope, others with skepticism. But just 2 years later, in 2015, Paula's story came to a tragic end. She took her own life in Indianapolis, leaving behind a legacy marked by both redemption and deep sorrow. Paula Cooper's story is one that haunts the justice system. It raises questions about the treatment of juveniles in the criminal justice system, the capacity for change, and whether redemption is possible for someone who has committed an unforgivable crime. It challenges the notion of justice itself. Was enough for Paula to change? Was it fair to offer a second chance to someone who had taken a life? Her case still stirs emotions and ignites debates to this day. And though Paula's life ended in tragedy, her story will forever be remembered as a chilling reminder of how the justice system, forgiveness, and second chances can collide in ways no one ever expects. Case 2. Michael Hernandez, February 2004. Southwood Middle School, nestled in the quiet town of Palmetto Bay, Florida, was like any other school that day. Halls buzzed with last-minute homework, chattering teenagers, and the usual teenage hustle. But by the end of the day, everything would change. One student would be dead, another in police custody, and the community left shattered. The crime that day would not just shock the parents and teachers. It would haunt everyone who heard it because of who the perpetrator was. A 14-year-old boy named Michael Hernandez. On the surface, Michael was the last person anyone would suspect. Quiet, well-spoken, and neatly dressed, he blended into the crowd. His teachers described him as intelligent, a kid who did his work without making a fuss. He wasn't a troublemaker, he wasn't a loner, nor was he popular. He was just average. But beneath the surface, something sinister was growing. Michael had started writing in his journals, dark, twisted thoughts that made his teachers uneasy if they had known. Thoughts about power, control, and what it would feel like to kill. As the days passed, the darkness in his mind deepened. He created a plan, a list, a meticulous, handwritten account of students he intended to kill, complete with their names and a timeline. At the top of that list was Jaime Goff, his closest friend. Jaime, also 14, was the exact opposite of Michael. He was friendly, well-liked by classmates, and known for his kind and soft-spoken nature. Jaime and Michael had known each other since childhood. They'd shared birthday parties, sat side by side in class, and spent hours together, laughing, joking, and just being kids. So, when Michael invited Jaime to meet him in the school bathroom early that morning before class, Jaime thought nothing of it. What happened next would horrify anyone who learned of it. Michael had brought a knife to school, concealed in his backpack. As they stood in that school bathroom, the moment Jaime turned his back, Michael attacked. A quick, brutal assault. A life snuffed out in seconds. When Jaime didn't return to class, a staff member went to check the restroom. What they found was a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The police were called. Michael was quickly found and brought in for questioning. What followed would leave detectives and the public reeling. Michael didn't deny his actions. He didn't even show remorse. Instead, he confessed almost casually to everything. He'd planned it for weeks. He had researched serial killers. He had created a kill list and was determined to follow through on it. He even admitted that he tried to lure another boy into that same bathroom just hours later. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold, calculated, premeditated violence. Michael spoke of his actions like someone discussing a science project. There was no rage, no emotion, just curiosity. He explained that he was fascinated by what it would feel like to kill. The lack of remorse was chilling, unsettling. A young boy, so calm, as if he were explaining the most ordinary of actions. As the case unfolded, the public was left grappling with a question that would linger for years. Should a 14-year-old be tried as an adult for such a horrific crime? Michael's defense team tried to argue that his age and mental health, he had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder and early signs of antisocial behavior, should be considered. But the prosecution painted a different picture. Michael knew what he was doing. His actions were deliberate, and he should be held accountable. In 2008, after a lengthy trial, Michael Hernandez was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Goff family, the trial and the conviction offered some semblance of justice, but no closure. They would never get Jaime back. Their son, taken in the most senseless, heartbreaking way, by someone he had called a friend. Michael's life in prison was long and quiet. He showed little sign of remorse or change. Prison staff reported that he was emotionally detached, isolated from the other inmates. He gave a few interviews over the years, but each time he remained cold. The case faded from the public eye until 2021, when news broke of Michael's sudden death. He collapsed in the shower at the age of 31. The cause of death was later determined to be a sudden cardiac event, though there was no foul play involved. And with his death came the resurfacing of the case. For a brief moment, the world remembered the shocking crime that had rocked a community and the chilling questions it had left behind. What could drive a 14-year-old to kill his friend? Was it just mental illness, or was there something more? Could he ever be rehabilitated? And what does this tell us about the nature of violence, especially when it comes from someone so young? Jaime Goff, meanwhile, is remembered by his friends and family as the kind, intelligent boy whose life was cut tragically short. His death has left a permanent scar on the community, one that will never heal. His family has spent years advocating for a deeper understanding of warning signs in young people, hoping that no other family would have to endure the pain they went through. In the end, the story of Michael Hernandez is not just about a crime. It's about the darkness that can fester in places we least expect.
It's about the chilling realization that sometimes the most violent acts are carried out not out of rage, but out of a twisted curiosity. And it's about the long road to understanding how such a thing could happen, and how we can prevent it from happening again.
Case 3, Brandon McInerney. On February 12, 2008, the halls of E.O. Green Junior High School in Oxnard, California, became the scene of a crime so chilling that it would shake the nation to its core. The murder of 15-year-old Larry King was no ordinary school shooting. It was a horrific act of violence that ignited a fierce national conversation about bullying, identity, and accountability, one that still echoes today. Brandon McInerney, just 14 years old, was a quiet 8th grader from a broken, unstable home. Raised in an environment marred by domestic violence and substance abuse, Brandon had grown up in a world of chaos. Despite his troubled past, he was considered bright and capable in school. But lurking beneath the surface was a simmering anger, an anger that would soon erupt in an unimaginable way. Larry King, on the other hand, was a bright, artistic soul, only a year older than Brandon. He had spent his life bouncing between foster homes, struggling to find acceptance. But Larry had recently begun expressing his true self. He wore makeup, high heels, and clothes that reflected his identity as a gay and gender non-conforming teen. To some, Larry's courage was inspiring. To others, it was a provocation. Larry's self-expression sparked a deep resentment in Brandon. Though some classmates supported Larry's bravery, others, including Brandon, could not accept it. There were whispers that Larry had made flirtatious comments to Brandon, possibly in front of their peers. Some said Larry had even told Brandon he liked him. Whether playful or defiant, these comments struck a nerve with Brandon. Instead of telling a teacher, changing seats, or seeking help, Brandon planned a deadly solution. On that fateful morning, Brandon came to school armed. He had stolen a handgun from his home, where firearms were carelessly left accessible despite his young age. Concealing the weapon in his backpack, he waited through the morning, stewing in his anger. In the middle of a computer lab class, with students and a teacher present, Brandon stood up, walked quietly behind Larry, and shot him in the back of the head. The classroom erupted in chaos. A second shot followed, and within moments, Larry was left bleeding on the floor. Larry was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was too severe. He was declared brain dead the next day, and his organs were donated. The tragedy left an indelible scar on those who witnessed it, especially the students and staff, who would forever be haunted by what they had seen. Brandon didn't run far. Police apprehended him just outside the school grounds, and he confessed to the crime without resistance. But this was no ordinary case. Prosecutors made the controversial decision to charge Brandon as an adult despite his age. The charges, first-degree murder and a hate crime enhancement. This decision split the country. Some argued that Brandon had planned the attack and that his actions were deliberate, making the hate crime charge justified. Others believed that, as a child, he was a product of his environment, raised in violence and toxicity. Was he truly capable of understanding the full weight of his actions? The legal process was a battleground of its own. In 2011, the first trial ended in a mistrial, with the jury unable to reach a unanimous decision.
But later that year, Brandon struck a plea deal. He pled guilty to second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, and the use of a firearm. His sentence, 21 years in prison. Though he was a minor, he would serve the majority of his time before being eligible for parole. The murder of Larry King became a symbol of the dangers faced by LGBTQ youth, especially those who choose to express their identity in hostile, unforgiving environments. Schools across the country began to re-examine their anti-bullying policies and the way they handled gender identity issues. Advocacy groups pushed for safer, more inclusive schools. But there was also a growing conversation about Brandon. His supporters argued that the system had failed him too. They pointed to his unstable upbringing and the toxic influences in his life. Could he have been saved? Could he have been given a chance at rehabilitation? In the years since, Brandon has expressed remorse for what he did. He admitted that the shooting was planned, but it seemed clear that he never fully grasped the depth of the consequences. His words of regret could never bring Larry back. Today, Brandon McInerney remains incarcerated, expected to be released in his 30s. His case continues to be studied by legal experts, educators, and advocates. It stands as a tragic example of what can happen when warning signs go ignored, when conflict is allowed to escalate unchecked, and when the line between childhood and accountability becomes murky. For the family of Larry King, the pain never ends. They lost a son, a vibrant young soul who was described brave and creative. And while the case no longer dominates the headlines, its impact remains. It is a somber reminder of the dangers of hate, the struggle for identity, and the often blurred line between adolescence and accountability.
Case 4. Jake Eakin. In 2003, Moses Lake, Washington, was about to be shaken by a story so chilling that it would challenge everything we think we know about childhood. At just 12 years old, Jake Eakin was no stranger to the quiet hum of middle school life. Like most kids his age, he spent his days in the classroom, doing homework, and playing games. But on February 15th, something happened that would rip through the small town, leaving a community in shock. Jake, along with his friends Evan Savoy and Craig Sorger, had gone to a local park, just like they had so many times before. But that afternoon, things took a dark turn. Craig, a 13-year-old boy with autism, was found dead in the woods not far from where the boys had been playing. It was a crime that no one could have anticipated, especially not in a quiet town like this. At first, Jake and Evan denied any involvement in Craig's death. But as the hours passed, their stories began to fall apart. Jake eventually admitted that he had witnessed the brutal attack on Craig, but he claimed that Evan was the one who had carried out the violence. Jake said he had been scared, overwhelmed, and unable to stop the horrific events unfolding before him. Despite his age, Jake was arrested and charged, and the state of Washington made a decision that would ignite a storm of controversy. They would try both boys as adults. The question was, could a 12-year-old truly understand the weight of such a decision? Could a child comprehend the consequences of a life sentence in an adult prison? The case split the community. Some believed Jake was too young to face the same punishment as an adult, while others argued that the crime's brutality should overshadow his age. Ultimately, Jake reached a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging his role in the crime, even though he wasn't the one who inflicted the fatal blow. In exchange, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison.
Evan, the more aggressive of the two, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 26 years. Jake's journey through the justice system began at an age when most children are just starting to figure out who they are. His early years in prison were filled with isolation, confusion, and a slow realization of the gravity of his actions. But instead of retreating into despair, Jake began to change. He started asking difficult questions, not just about the crime, but about the justice system itself. Could a child truly be held responsible in the same way as an adult? Should kids like him be given a chance to grow, to change, to be accountable? By the time Jake was released from prison in 2016, after serving nearly 13 years, he was a different person. Most people expected him to fade into obscurity, but Jake had other plans. He became a public speaker, working with organizations that advocate for criminal justice reform, particularly the treatment of minors in the legal system. His voice, once lost in the chaos of his youth, was now being used to raise awareness and spark important conversations. But Jake's journey isn't about redemption. It's about responsibility. He has never minimized his role in what happened. He acknowledges the pain he caused to the Sorger family and the life that was lost. His story isn't one of escaping his past, but of using it to prevent others from making the same mistakes. A 12-year-old's actions, driven by fear, confusion, and immaturity, changed lives forever. And yet, Jake's story is also a reminder that even the darkest moments can be transformed into a mission for change. The case of Jake Eakin remains one of Washington State's most controversial criminal trials. It has sparked debates over the treatment of minors in the criminal justice system, questioning how young is too young to face adult charges. For Jake, the real question remains: how much can a 12-year-old truly understand about life, death, and the irreversible consequences of their actions? This case forces us to ask difficult questions with no easy answers. How does society respond when a child is responsible for something so tragic? And when the dust settles, who gets to decide whether a child can truly be accountable for the life-altering choices they've made? Jake Eakin's story is not of escape. It's one of facing the past, taking responsibility, and finding a way to turn tragedy into a message of change. And in the end, it raises one chilling thought: how many lives can a single choice alter forever?
Case 5. Nathaniel Brazill. The final day of school. A time for celebration, excitement for the summer, and the bittersweet goodbyes to classmates and teachers. But in Lake Worth, Florida, on May 26, 2000, that day would forever be etched in the minds of those who lived through it. It wasn't just the end of the school year. It was the day a 13-year-old boy would change everything. Nathaniel Brazill was your average middle school student, quiet, polite, well-liked by teachers, and active in the school band. No major issues in his record. He was the kind of kid who blended in. But inside, he was a different story. Behind his shy demeanor, Nathaniel was struggling with things he couldn't express. Family problems, confusion, frustration, emotions he had nowhere to place. It started out as a simple prank, a few water balloons thrown during the last day of school. Just another harmless moment in the chaotic fun of young adolescence. But when Nathaniel was sent to the office for his behavior, things took a dark turn. The simple punishment spiraled into something much worse. A suspension, a slap on the wrist, or so it should have been.
Instead of going home to calm down, Nathaniel made a fateful choice. He didn't stay put. Instead, he grabbed his bike and headed to a friend's house. There, sitting unattended, was a handgun belonging to his friend's father. A gun that would change everything. Nathaniel, in a moment of rage, took it. He rode back to the school, the place he should have been walking away from. He didn't hesitate. He walked in, calm and collected, carrying with him the weight of a decision that would haunt him forever. He was looking for one person, Mr. Barry Grunow, his English teacher. Mr. Grunow, the man known for his kindness and dedication, had no idea what was about to happen. Nathaniel asked to speak to him, and then, without warning, he pulled the trigger. A single shot. A life taken in an instant. The school erupted in chaos. Teachers and students scrambled in disbelief. A 13-year-old, seemingly ordinary, had just committed an unthinkable act. In the time it took for law enforcement to arrive, Nathaniel was already in custody. He didn't fight. He didn't resist. He cooperated with the authorities, expressing remorse, but also confusion. How could someone so young grasp the full weight of what he'd done? The case ignited a national firestorm. Was a 13-year-old capable of such cold, calculated violence? Should a child be held accountable for something like this? The decision to charge Nathaniel as an adult sparked fierce debate. On one side, some argued that a crime of this magnitude couldn't go unpunished. On the other, voices called for compassion, for understanding that Nathaniel was still just a child, too young to truly comprehend his actions. The trial was a battle between two worlds, one that demanded justice for a life lost, and another that begged for mercy for a boy who had yet to fully experience the world. The prosecution presented Nathaniel's decision to take the gun and his calm demeanor as evidence of intent. But the defense pointed to his age and emotional turmoil, suggesting it was a tragic moment of impulse, not cold-blooded murder. In 2001, Nathaniel was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison, plus 7 years for aggravated assault. The public reaction was mixed. Was justice served, or had a child been condemned to a life sentence for a mistake made in a moment of weakness? Behind bars, Nathaniel began the slow process of rehabilitation. He earned his high school diploma, took vocational courses, and sought counseling. Over time, he expressed regret for the incident that had ruined so many lives. But for the Grunow family, there was no turning back. The pain of losing a husband, father, and beloved teacher never healed. The story of Nathaniel Brazill was more than just a shocking crime. It became a national conversation about the treatment of juvenile offenders, gun access, and school safety. As he approaches his release in 2028, after more than 20 years behind bars, the question remains: did he serve enough time for what he did? Was he a victim of his circumstances, or was he always destined to be the person who made a life-altering decision at too young an age? One thing is certain: Nathaniel Brazill's story will never be forgotten. It stands as a chilling reminder of how a single split-second decision can ripple through a life, a community, and a nation. That wraps up the first half of this chilling list. From teenage killers to motives still shrouded in mystery, a stark reminder of how dark human nature can be. But we're not done yet. In the next upload, we'll reveal the rest of this disturbing roster, each case more shocking than the last. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next.